Our first speaker is Angelina Ruiz.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angelina Ruiz, and I would like to welcome you to my artist talk for the MFA program at Lesley University. My project, Ni Aquí Ni Allá, is an exploration of nostalgia and memory within the lens of the Puerto Rican diaspora. The imagery in this project links the spaces that my ancestors have resided in, both the archipelago of Puerto Rico and the borough of the Bronx. By combining my photography, archival imagery, and found footage, I'm able to facilitate bonds across geographical locations and different generations. The interaction between the images tries to solve a longing for home that many people across the diaspora face. Ni aquí ni allá, neither here nor there. The repurposing of these images is my way of working to change the visual iterations of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the contemporary landscape. I want to break the colonial gaze that marginalized people have been met with throughout history, and by controlling the narrative, I can bring these faces into the forefront of a white-centric art world. My work always strives to be prudent, educate the community, and carve a space out for marginalized people to safely exist. I want to begin with a quote by Bell Hooks from her book, Art on My Mind, as she discusses the importance of the camera to history of marginalized people. When the psychohistory of a people is marked by ongoing loss, when entire histories are denied, hidden, erased, documentation can become an obsession. The camera must have seemed a magical instrument to many of the displaced and marginalized groups trying to carve out new destinies for themselves in the Americas. In the earliest iterations of Ni Aquí Ni Allá, I knew that at the core, I was greatly drawn to the idea of nostalgia and homesickness. After leaving my home in the Bronx, where I was born and raised, and moving to Puerto Rico in 2019, I was met with complex feelings. I was missing the familiar streets, lined with stores or restaurants I'd memorized, or the rumble of an approaching train or bus. But amongst all the uneasy feelings of a new place, I knew that I was allotted a huge privilege of getting to return to the land where my ancestors lived. What was once their home was now mine. During my research on the history of nostalgia, I was led to the work of C. Nadia Ceramedicus, a cultural anthropologist who discusses the etymology of the word as well as its meaning in both English and Greek. The Greek history of the word nostalgia frames it as an experience that is actively shifting and framing the past, present, and future. This can inform work done by diasporic peoples, as there is a need to understand their history, as well as working through the generational trauma. While some might be trying to fill in the blanks, others might desire to relive old memories. By comparison, the English understanding of the word nostalgia speaks to one in which the past is finite. This iteration of nostalgia is more idealistic and akin to the glamorizing of past decades because of certain aspects of the culture. After reflecting on this notion of nostalgia and the sentimentality that it held, I became increasingly interested in my family history. Not just the oral history, but the visual as well. I began rifling through boxes of old photographs of my paternal grandmother, of old photographs my paternal grandmother had left behind after she passed away over a decade ago. The photos were not just hers, but ones of her extended families. My grandmother had inadvertently become the keeper of memories. These photographs were putting together a past that I'd not been a part of, let alone knew existed. From school pictures to holidays and birthdays, my mind began to race, attempting to recreate what life might have been like for them. What did they like to do for fun? What were their favorite foods? What music did they like? I desperately wanted their memories to be a part of my world. Throughout the process of digitizing these photographs, I realized I had an interest in people's histories, whether or not I had a direct connection to them. My research at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College was a huge part of my research for Ni Aquí Ni Allá. Using their database, I was able to look at images of Puerto Ricans from all across the diaspora and of many generations. The more digging I did, I realized I was able to find images specifically taken in the Bronx, and many of the people in these images looked like my own family, with their homes resembling ones I'd seen in their pictures. I began to draw visual comparisons in these photos that I discovered in the online archives. When sifting through these historical archives, I was frequently looking for people that might have been a part of my family's life at some point. But during this work, I found that many of the images were made by those who were outside the community. When seeing this material made by, quote, outsiders, the mood took a clear shift. One of the notable outsiders that frequently documented Puerto Rico was the Detroit Publishing Company, specifically following the 1898 takeover of the archipelago. Although the Detroit Publishing Company worked on documenting Puerto Rico, the imagery wasn't always a skies and water, and sometimes the lens was turned on the people who inhabited the space. The photographers at the time might have thought it was innocent exploration and documentation. However, their perception shows how deep colonialism runs, especially in the archival field. From my perspective, it's frustrating that iterations of people of color throughout history have been constantly exploited, either for research or for profit. Although historical imagery can be weaponized to create preconceived notions about other cultures, it can also be used by one's people to change the narrative. As for Puerto Rican culture and my continued narrative of the Puerto Rican diaspora, repurposing this imagery can break those stereotypes. In Ni Aquí Ni Allá, I am taking images out of an archival context and putting them into a fine art context to help the subjects to gain back their relatability and their humanity. A pivotal moment in my work towards Ni Aquí Ni Allá was the beginning of my use of fragmented images. I began to crop photos and collage them in with photographs I was currently making of Puerto Rico. This allowed me to begin to create an environment in which various timelines could exist. For example, in El Sentimiento, I digitally collaged a photograph I made of Puerto Rico with the photographs from my mother's archive. I chose to only show fragments, leaving the identities a mystery. The act of cropping is important as I don't want the viewer to be distracted with other parts of the image, preoccupied trying to dissect and figure out more background information. I want them to focus on what I've shown them placed in this new world. This process then carried over into my other collages, such as Las Flores. These fragments often rely on their use of positive and negative space, as well as playing with scale and positioning. The cropping in these collages is often instinctual and based off my interest in storytelling, as well as recontextualizing them from their original existence in a personal archive. The frequent manipulation done throughout these works allows me to take a secondary step away from the initial repurposing of these images and then creating a unique and regenerated version of them. From these collages sprouted my interest in finding video footage of both the Bronx and Puerto Rico, further linking these places, but adding sound and motion. All the material used in Ni Aquí Ni Allá was sourced from YouTube on different accounts, some of which were personal, where I found home movies, parties, and family vacations. Others were news reports or documentaries with footage of destruction, colonization, and poverty. Using video as the primary medium for this project opened new doors for me, as I was able to layer audio and different footage, intersperse clips, as well as use spoken word as a means of driving the theme of the piece. The poem that is used in the audio of the piece, entitled Puerto Rican Obituary by Pedro Pietri, sets the scene of the realities that Puerto Ricans face when coming to the United States. His poem fits perfectly within a sea of imagery of Puerto Rican families, both on the archipelago and the Bronx, and helps to blur the line between the two locations, showing that the problems are quite similar across the diaspora. And I have a clip from this project.
Puerto Rican Obituary. They worked. They were always on time. They were never late. They never spoke back when they were insulted. They worked. They never took days off that were not on the calendar. They never went on strike without permission. They worked 10 days a week and were only paid for 5. They worked, they worked, they worked and they died. They died broke. They died owing. They died never knowing what the front entrance of the First National City Bank looks like.
Another driving force of the themes throughout Ni Aquí Ni Allá was my separation of the videos from the original audios and matching them with ones that would change the narrative and align with my intentions. An example of this is shown in the screenshots above, in which I used the visuals from a video, showing Puerto Rico from a touristic perspective, alongside an audio of a woman critiquing the so-called progress that is being made there. She explains that the version of the archipelago that an outsider might face is one that is starkly different from one faced by Puerto Ricans. While creating the work for Ni Aquí Ni Allá, I found inspiration in other Black and Latinx artists and how they portrayed colonization, racism, and trauma. One of them that I heavily resonated with was the work of Dominican-American multidisciplinary artist, Joridi Minaya. Utilizing commercial imagery, online catalogs, archival photos, and even paintings, Minaya repurposes her images through collage, giving new meaning to both colonial and male gaze. In her body of work, titled Dominican Postcards, she utilizes vintage postcards from the Dominican Republic and tropical backgrounds to make portraits. Minaya focuses on the physicality of these images, as well as whatever external forces have had on the weathering of these images. A piece in Dominican Postcards that I found as a source of inspiration was Continuum 2. Part of my fascination with this piece lies in her using a painting as source material along with archival imagery. On the left, Minaya fragments a painting by Canadian artist Francois Beauport, which is formally titled Portrait of a Negro Slave, 1786, and was more recently renamed Portrait of a Haitian Woman. On the right, she sources a photograph from a brochure of the touristic town Bavaro in the Dominican Republic. The collage of these two images is poignant, as the viewer can be reminded of how the anti-Blackness and racism in the Caribbean, as well as how dark-skinned women are treated within these communities. Minaya challenges the expectations of women, specifically Black and brown women, and draws the parallels between slavery and the tourism industry. When looking at both images side by side, the fact that they both remain nameless faces of Black women simply existing for service while the imagery is being created centuries apart is haunting. Another artist that I found as a source of inspiration for my thesis is African-American artist, filmmaker, and cinematographer, Arthur Jafa. His work often reflects on how society views Black people and how embedded Black culture really is within the fabrics of American culture. In his acclaimed piece, Love is the Message is Death, Jafa explores the Black identity through found footage clips showing everything from people dancing to the LA riots and even scenes of police brutality. The piece is deeply moving and reflects on how Black people are depicted in media, contrasted with the reality of how they are treated in the United States. Like the work of Minaya, Jodi and Minaya, Jafa shows viewers how the physical body can quickly turn to something used for consumption or for the entertainment of others. His continued use of different types of found footage throughout Love is the Message communicates the way both Black joy and Black pain are viewed. Through Jafa's vision of presenting the Black experience, I was encouraged to use similar means of media to convey both the joy and pain of the Puerto Rican diaspora. There are parallels not only between the formats used by both myself and Jafa, but the story of coming from a long line of colonized and abused people is one that many marginalized people can sympathize with. From the earliest accounts of historical imagery, marginalized people all over the world have been shown a version of our ancestors that is invalidating and reduced to props in an archive. Through the reclamation of these images, we can take back that power and change this narrative. From my perspective as an artist of the Puerto Rican diaspora, my ongoing search with the archive has given me a sense of healing and resolve, and I find that the longing I experience is more common than I anticipated. For those who long for a past and an understanding where they came from, Ni Aquí Ni Allá offers a solution in which these timelines can exist concurrently. Although we can't change the past, it is constantly informing who we are as people, the decisions we make, and how we shape our own futures. Thank you.
Do we have questions? Yeah.
Hi, Angelina. That was great. I have two related questions we can fold into one, I guess. But I'm curious about the physicality of the material that you were working with originally, and what the difference between that, sort of the personal physical photographs, and working in something that's not physical, film is, and I guess I'm curious specifically, like, which one you feel, is there one that you feel is more effective within a activist context? I mean, that's maybe not the right word, but you started off by saying you wanted to sort of have the work be active in
Right.
some ways, yeah, in a community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think like naturally I'm just drawn to the physical photos just because how they feel, like how they smell, how they look, like the dates, like some of the photographs even had like lipstick prints on it. You know, it brings up a lot of different questions, but then the accessibility of having the video and being able to show it everywhere and getting it to more people and more eyes. And, you know, I could put subtitles in Spanish that people can read in different languages. So I guess, I mean, I love both of them. So I want them both to work concurrently and kind of play off each other.
And where would the film ideally be seen? I mean, I know with Jafa, for instance, and I'm not sure I agree with him, but he's pretty insistent that the thing not exist
Right.
on the internet. You physically engage with a large scale projection.
I mean, I would want everyone to see it ideally. I want it to be accessible. I want it to be, you can play it on your phone or have headphones or listen to it through speakers or in the dark or in the light or however it is, or maybe without sound, maybe you're just reading the words, or maybe you're just listening to it and distracted by that, or just looking at the images on the screen. So however people want to like consume this, I feel like that's up to them. I'm just like packaging it and sort of giving it to them and being like, here, like, and then I want to hear what they think too. Like I want to hear their feedback as a part of it.
It is finally, how long is the piece and where can people see it?
It's about like 10 minutes, 30 seconds. It's going to be in the gallery here, but tonight I'm going to be putting it on YouTube. So I'll send out that link and everyone can view it if you don't get a chance to like come in person.
I have a question that I think relates. You know, my mom's from Taiwan, which is a similar like small country. That's a big giant colonial power, and Taiwan has dealt first with Chinese colonialism and for that Japanese. But if I look back to pre-Japanese colonialism, there's also tremendous amount of issues. I think it's a very stratified society, and I think women are really marginalized. And so it makes it difficult in a certain sense to look back to the pre-colonial era as a kind of ideal.
Right.
And so I'm wondering how you wrestle with some of those concerns, especially for pushing into the future.
That's a good question. I mean, it's like more of a longing for like a familial past and like what my family went through, my ancestors, and like what they saw, like what the environment looked like to them, but not necessarily like glamorizing it, if that makes sense. Like I don't know if I necessarily want to go back to those very hard, difficult times, but it's like, what were they seeing? Like, what was their daily walk like? Like, where did they go to get a cup of coffee? Like, what music were they listening to when they were sad or happy? Like, that's what I'm really fascinated with. Like, if I could just be a fly on the wall 150 years ago, what would that look like? So that's sort of like what I'm trying to recreate, which goes hand in hand with like the nostalgia, but it's not necessarily, it's a longing for the past, but like to look into it, but not necessarily like be back there, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because it's about a kind of connection to family and to land, rather than reproducing a certain structure that might have been there.
Right. It's like hearing a story like your family would tell you and you're like, damn, I wish I was there. Like, I wish I could have laughed with you guys, or I wish I could have like smiled or like been at that graduation or funeral. It was a sad event, just like not being able to have that and like hold on to that and just seeing those pictures. So I'm sort of piecing everything together.
Angelina, congratulations. That
Thank
was
you.
really beautiful. I obviously feel really connected to your work because I think we deal with a lot of the same issues and emotions. But I'm really curious, having moved to Puerto Rico, two things. Do you feel like you've embedded yourself within the Puerto Rican art world in any way? Or do you feel that you kind of maybe recognized your identity more clearly by interacting with this place you had in some ways idealized, connected to your family? That's probably my first question. I'll let you answer.
Okay. It's difficult because I feel like leaving New York, I like very highly identify with like being a New Yorker and like being from the Bronx, and then going to PR and I'm like, okay, but like I am Puerto Rican, but I didn't grow up with that culture. So then I'm in this weird limbo where it's, you know, relearning Spanish because my Spanish wasn't the best by Bronx standards. It was great, but by Puerto Rican standards, like I still need to get around. Like English isn't necessarily like, not everyone speaks English there. And I don't want to alienate myself by like not being able to talk to like someone at the store, but we're both the same heritage, but like we can't speak the same language. So it like brings a lot of boundaries with that. And then I'm like kind of slowly working through and, you know, making friends and doing art things and just sort of immersing myself, I feel like is the best way to resolve that. Even if I'm still struggling with language, you know, I want to feel like it's my home, and it is my home, but it's still that sort of like walking on eggshells-ness because, you know, wasn't born and raised there, not the same experience that everyone else had. And I'm sure it's probably vice versa. You know, Puerto Ricans that come to the States and they're like, well, I'm Puerto Rican, this is a Puerto Rican community, but like there's buses and trains and it's cold in the winter. Like what's that's like not what I grew up with, you know? So definitely something that I'm still wrestling with. Plus with COVID, that added an extra layer of like the pandemic, like now I can't go out and meet people and see each other. And Puerto Rico is very, everything's active and face to face and lots of gatherings and like family time. And I missed out on part of that because of not being able to have that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can we give Angelina a hand?